Welcome to our May STEM Salon. I'm Linda Rosen, the CEO of Change the Equation. And here, as we're beginning to see the end of the school year, nothing could be more important than talking about teachers and teaching and the learning that goes on. Reading the newspaper today about what the teachers did in Oklahoma with the tornado was yet another reminder of how teachers have their priorities right. And how courageous and brave many of them were in those two schools. It was very touching. At the same time, we know that teachers and kids are beginning to mark off the days. The end is in sight, and the teachers are as eager for the end of the year, with good reason, as the students. So we really want to talk a great deal about teaching. We know, not only from research, but just from common sense, that the quality of what goes on in the classroom is very much dependent on the quality of the teaching that goes on. When that door is closed, there's a very personal relationship, and the teacher needs a very robust toolbox to be able to meet the needs of all the young children sitting in front of them. So Common Core or not, excellent assessments or not, teaching really matters. Yet we know that we face a national shortage of math and science teachers, in particular qualified math and science teachers. This isn't new. Some of us, I won't mention my own name, but we're working on this back as far as 1986. But the problem has grown even bigger, partly with our insistence that math in particular and science is really for all students, especially in high school, and the increase that we're looking for in enrollment. But we do know that across the country, fewer than half of chemistry and physics teachers majored in those subjects. A quarter of all high school math teachers do not hold degrees in mathematics. Less than a third of 8th grade students have at least one teacher with an undergraduate degree in mathematics. The real travesty is in many states, low-income and minority students are least likely to have access to teachers with the best credentials. Research has also shown that elementary school teachers often have somewhat shaky confidence in their own knowledge of mathematics and science. But there is really renewed attention. As you know, back in 2010, President Obama noted the need for 100,000 new math and science teachers over the next 10 years, partly due to the baby boomer retirement, partly due to the growth in population. The Carnegie Corporation of New York has sponsored a 100K in 10 initiative that is a movement of which everyone seated at this table today, including Change the Equation, is a part of, to ensure that every child has access to quality STEM education by recruiting, training, hiring, and most importantly, supporting excellent STEM teachers. As I said, all three of the programs we'll hear from today are part of this movement. We'll be talking about why there's a shortage of teachers, what defines quality teaching, and what policy and philanthropy can do to create a robust pipeline of STEM teachers. So let me introduce the panel sitting in front of you. To my immediate left is Dave Saba, the Chief Operating Officer for the National Math and Science Initiative, known familiarly as NIMSI, for those in the acronym space. Dave is the Chief Operating Officer, which operates the UTeach program, among other projects. But today he will be talking about UTeach, which helps college students graduate with both a STEM degree and a teaching certificate. Next to him is Dan Chazan, Director of the Center for Mathematics Education at the University of Maryland in College Park, very nearby. Dan's research focuses on mathematics teaching and learning at every grade level. His work includes being the principal investigator on a project looking at the teaching of Algebra 1 in urban settings, and the creation of a master's program that fuses elementary and middle grades math certification. And then on the far left is Grace Chen, the Director of Math and Science Design at Teach for America, a former math teacher in rural North Carolina. Boy, math rules today. Grace now works to design programming, content, and support to improve the quality of preparation and development for pre-service and novice secondary STEM teachers at Teach for America. There's more information at your seat about each of these esteemed panelists. What we're going to do is have me pose some questions for those of you who are new to our format. I've encouraged folks to interrupt one another nicely. We're all very polite here, but really to build on the conversation from one another, and then we will open it up to questions from you. So with that, let's get started. Movable mics today. I should note that we are being videotaped, as we often are for these STEM salons, and it will be posted on the website, and we will make deliberate effort to push the video out to interested audiences as well. I do ask that when you have a question, you identify who you are, limit your question, get to that question as quickly as you can, and we'll do our best to answer. So with that, let me get started. And I think I'd like to first know what's the biggest problem that you see we face in creating a robust pipeline of qualified, highly competent STEM teachers.
I'm usually not shy. Whoa, hi. Wow, I told you I had a big voice. So we usually break it down. When we looked at developing, when You Teach and the You Teach Institute looked at developing the program, they really broke the problem down into multiple levels. And the first was recruiting students that were really at the top of their class. We know that that's one of the bigger problems that we have in the United States, is that the people that go into teaching, and McKinsey studies show that they're not exactly our best and brightest at all times. So one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that we were recruiting some of the best and brightest into teaching, because we've seen in other studies that's really one of those key factors. The second is having that deep content knowledge. And You Teach, each one of the You Teach institutes is located in the College of Science so that we can get those math and science majors to come into teaching. And we really feel that the deep content knowledge, especially with Common Core state standards, especially with next generation science standards, is going to be even more critical. And then having the right teachers in the right places. If we don't have enough teachers, then there's always going to be a shortage, and the schools that are getting the short shrift on that are the schools in their inner city. So by making sure that we have enough teachers coming in, we're recruiting the right teachers, we're giving them the deep content knowledge, that's what's going to build that pipeline. And we've got to expand those programs that are actually doing that. The one thing I will say, though, is there's 3.5 million teachers out there. So there's never going to be one right way to recruit and train 3.5 million people. So you've got to look for different programs at the same time. So I'm not saying ours is the right way. Ours is definitely a way that's getting great results, and we're doing some great things. But I definitely think there's room when you have to recruit that many.
Great. So let me pick up on that last theme, because I don't know about the metaphor of a pipeline. I mean, we use it a lot, but I wonder how it might constrict our thinking. And so one of the issues that I think we have is how we think about the issue. And so I would identify a big problem as, if we're sticking to the metaphor, the diameter of the pipeline, but how our conceptions of the problem might frame how we think about how to enlarge the diameter of the pipeline. So I want to suggest 3 particular examples of ranges of ways to think about it. One that is on my mind a lot right now is how we leverage the existing STEM knowledge in the larger society beyond the narrow content majors that we've thought of so far for certification. How do we get, for example, the knowledge that engineers have, the knowledge that geographers have, other kinds of STEM content related to what might go on in schools into the picture? Second, I think an important issue to consider is the demographics of the population that we've attracted into STEM teaching and how to change the nature of those demographics and to include more Black and Latino teachers. And then the third is building on the existing teacher workforce to figure out how to take people who are already certified as teachers, primarily as elementary school teachers, and figure out how to strengthen the role that they can play in issues of STEM education in particular.
Yeah, thank you. And I would definitely echo what Dave, you said about the general challenge I think the teaching profession faces in attracting highly qualified candidates in all fields. And I think particularly in STEM, when so many of our top candidates have very lucrative alternative options that tend to be higher prestige, higher pay, as seen in our society. And so when it comes to recruiting those people, I think one thing that we've worked really hard to do is to try to sweeten the deal. We partner very explicitly with professional organizations, with associations like Tau Beta Pi, the Society of Professional Engineers. We work with STEM faculty members on university campuses to really help frame up teaching as a viable, desirable STEM profession. We also partner with Amgen, Medtronic, a couple of other organizations to provide grants to some of our incoming STEM teachers with STEM backgrounds so that they can help with their transitional expenses, often moving, getting certified, some of those expenses. And so we try to build our pipeline in that way and bring in more people who might not otherwise consider teaching to be a viable and desirable profession. And then when I think about the pipeline, it's a large part of it is getting more people in. Just as large of a part is getting the people who are in to stay in. And that's something that we think about a lot at Teach for America. And what we have found is that our STEM teachers, I think teachers in general, but particularly our STEM teachers, given the alternative options they have, are just much more likely to stay in the profession if they feel successful, if they feel that it's intellectually stimulating, if they feel like it's the kind of work that they love and they want to do. And I think that's where the role of professional development comes in. I think often, currently in our country, teaching is not always seen as a profession, or as something where teachers can continue to grow and develop and get better over time. And I think our best and brightest students, like many of our other students, crave that sense of autonomy, that sense of wanting to be wanting to grow, wanting to learn, wanting to continually get better. And I think really, really strong professional development can help create that sense of this being a profession that our teachers truly want to commit their entire careers to. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that professional development later. But I think that there's a lot that we can do to both bring more people into the profession and then also make them more likely to stay.
So Dan, you intrigued me when you said pipeline might not be the best metaphor. Do you have another one to offer? Sorry, not meaning to put you on the spot. And can you describe it sort of in the context of what you do at University of Maryland?
Ooh. Oh, that's nice. So
I've known Dan a long time.
Yeah.
He won't be too mad at me.
So one of the things that I don't like about the pipeline metaphor is I don't know how to think about flow in the pipeline. I don't know how to think about the nonlinear dynamics of that flow. And I also don't know how to think about the rigidity of pipes. So maybe blood vessels or something, because, I think we need to think about structures as a society that grow and change in response to a variety of needs. So that doesn't fully answer your question, but that's just a thought about it. In terms of the kinds of things that we've been doing, we've been trying to use opportunities that come up in the landscape. So for us at the University of Maryland, the state moving to having certification in the middle grades in 4 through 9 is a huge new opportunity. It allows us to recruit more broadly on campus in a whole host of places where we couldn't recruit in the past. For secondary teachers who, given state regulations and accreditation pressures, have to have an undergraduate major in particular fields. So that's one place where we've been able to work. Another place that we've been able to work because of that certification is in collaboration with local districts to create programs for the needs that they've identified in middle grades and to create add-on endorsement programs for existing teachers. And then another initiative that also is primarily focused at the middle grades is one that we have, the M-SMART program, that focuses on using the state's resident teacher status, again, in collaboration with a local school district, to recruit people who live in the community to try to staff hard-to-staff schools and to figure out ways as a part of the recruitment process to create opportunities for people to develop some of the content background, for example, that they might not have had, but seeing middle grades as an opening or a place where there's some room to grow.
Dave, can you talk a little bit more about You Teach, just to make sure everybody's got a picture of what it is and what its goals are?
Certainly. The main goal that we had, both You Teach and the National Math and Science Initiative, was to create more great math and science teachers for our schools. And it really did go through a deep analysis to figure what do we need these teachers to do? Where do we need to recruit these teachers from? And then how do we make sure that some of the things that Grace was talking about, such as the retention, such as going into teaching, we're not going to hurt the program. So students going through the program go into the classroom early and often. We use incentives. One of the recruitment tools we use is that students in their freshman or sophomore year are allowed to go to the first 2 You Teach classes for free so that they can really see. And those classes immediately put them in the classroom. So we're right away in their freshman and sophomore year really understanding, is this something I want to do or not do? And then once they really go into the curriculum, what we find is 88% of those kids are going into teaching because they're having all of that classroom experience along the way. Then the other thing that Grace said too was making sure they have the tools to succeed. That is one of the critical elements of this. So we really spend a lot of time on project-based learning. They really leave there with a full understanding and a full experience. Another element of the program is that there's a master teacher, a K-12 teacher that's a part of the program that is their mentor as they're going through all these field experiences to make sure that they've got that understanding of what's working, what's not. They're coming out and observing them. So even if they don't get a great student teaching partner, they still have this K-12 mentor that's layered on top. So we really looked at what are the issues that a lot of teacher preparation programs have, how do we fix those so that those don't occur in the You Teach program, and then finally, once they get in there, they get into the classroom, so 88% are leaving, going into the classroom, 5 years later, 80% of them are still teaching. That's a tremendous retention mark. That's far better than other programs, and it's all of those things at the beginning. It's giving them the tools, the confidence that they're going to be successful so that they stay in the classroom. And the program's outlined here, at least the core elements of the program, so you can read through that. And there are 35 universities right now that are participating in the You Teach program. We just received a grant from Howard Hughes Medical Institute to expand that to 10 more universities, and there's an RFP process going on right now. So the universities have to understand that they really want this. The College of Science and the College of Education deans have to come together and say, we're going to work together and make this work. And then they have to apply for it, and then they get this tremendous amount of support from the You Teach Institute down in Texas.
Grace, Teach for America is very well known, but just in case, can you give us a little primer?
Sure. So Teach for America, we recruit and place teachers, many of whom are college graduates. We're actually shifting some of our focus. About a quarter of our new teachers now are career changers who've been out of college for more than 5 years. So we recruit teachers from all over the country, all different walks of life, to train them and prepare them to teach in our nation's highest need, urban and rural low-income schools. in doing that, we certainly, as Dan was mentioning, prioritize the recruitment, training, and placement of teachers who share the backgrounds of some of the students in the communities that we work with. And so about a third of our teaching core identify as people of color. And so the way that we do that when we recruit, we have a pretty intense recruitment process. We've got a lot of recruiters on college campuses, recruiters partnering with corporations or nonprofit organizations that have traditionally sent us a lot of folks, and work with them through a pretty rigorous selection and admissions process. We provide a very, very intense summer training where our teachers receive in the moment classroom experience. They're actually teaching summer school for a group of students and being mentored and supervised by both a veteran teacher from the district, but also experienced teachers on our staff as well. And so once they enter their full-time classrooms in the fall, we provide ongoing support and professional development we ask for a 2-year commitment. And about 2/3 of our alumni stay in the field of education after they complete their 2-year commitment. About half of those remain as full-time classroom teachers.
Thank you, thank you. So many of you know that last September, Change the Equation released what we called our vital signs, state-by-state reports. So there are 51 reports for each state and that colony called the District of Columbia. And we also acknowledged how difficult it was to collect some data. We wanted data that was comparable across states, but we came out with another little document. I don't remember the exact title, but it's basically the data we wish we had but haven't been able to find. And one of the issues was around teaching quality, because what we have at best are really proxies for teaching quality. And the data that I read at the beginning, whether you have a major, how long you've been teaching, are proxies, not necessarily promises that the individual is really a high-quality teacher and knows how to handle the students in his or her classroom. So what I've got now are a series of questions to see what we can talk about, what we can cull out about how we ensure that teachers have that toolkit that they need. So how much math and science content do teachers know to be able to successfully teach at the secondary level? And similarly, how do the needs of an elementary school teacher differ from a secondary teacher? Dave, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time applying for grants, and you always want that great, hook right at the beginning that talks about deep content knowledge. And so trying to find a really definitive study on that says, yes, absolutely, deep content knowledge is critical, and this is what it's going to get you in the classroom, has been a little bit challenging. We all understand that. I mean, if you've had a great teacher in math or science, it hasn't been somebody that had weak math or science knowledge. You're the great teacher that inspired you was the one that had incredible knowledge. I'm an engineer. I had a physics prof that was just unbelievable, and he was just so brilliant that it just inspired you. And the PCAST report actually talked about it. It said, we need 2 things. We need preparation and we need inspiration. And that comes from people that really know their content knowledge. What UTeach did was develop an observation protocol for our teachers to really understand, did they have that content knowledge? Were they able to demonstrate it in class? And did it actually convey to the students? That observation protocol was one of the ones that was analyzed in the MET study that at the higher end had really solid results. So we feel like we have a good tool to measure our students when there are students who are becoming teachers out in the field to really understand it. And really that was driven by content knowledge. That Utah protocol really takes into account content knowledge. So we feel like we have that link now. We feel like not only do we have that link based on the MET study by the Gates Foundation, but also that link shows that our teachers are getting that done, that content knowledge and what they're learning and the project-based learning is starting to translate into student achievement.
Grace? Not sure where that came from.
It was a plea for help, it sounded like.
Sure. I think content knowledge is tricky because when we talk about content knowledge, I think we're actually talking about a lot of different things. We're talking about whether somebody knows the math or knows the science, can do the problem, sort of the, like what you would expect in a typical math class to know as a student or a science class. But then we're also talking about whether the teacher understands like where that knowledge comes from, how it was created, where it was formed, how it was derived, so that they can present it to students in a way that makes sense and allows them to find meaning in what they're doing rather than just presenting a bunch of disjointed, disconnected, discrete facts. We're also talking about their ability to know how this content is connected to other content that maybe students have learned in previous classes, or maybe that students are going to learn in the future, or maybe that might be relevant to students' lives and their lived realities outside of school. We're also talking about their ability to know what's tricky about this content, why it can be tricky to learn, whether it's tricky to learn, and how it's tricky to learn, so that they can respond in those ways. And so I think when we talk about content knowledge, there are a lot of things within that we need to disaggregate and think about that can be challenging regardless of the background and preparation that a teacher has had. And so at Teach for America, there are a couple of things that we're doing to really ensure that our teachers, regardless of the credential they have, regardless of undergrad courses, regardless of certification exams, there's professional development that we provide to ensure that they're feeling really, really solid in all of those areas. And that type of professional development can be tricky because what that 6th grade teacher needs to know is very different from what the 9th grade Algebra 1 teacher or the 12th grade AP Calculus teacher needs to understand. And when you've got so many teachers all over the country, it's really hard to develop a single course or a single set of courses that's going to meet all of their needs. And so we've actually switched to online learning. We're partnering with a graduate school of education to create a series of online courses that build this knowledge by having video of experienced teachers teaching this content, very specific to systems of equations or definitions of a derivative or quadratic functions. And so our teachers can engage in these courses to have the content explained at a deeper level than what they might find in their textbook, to watch veteran teachers teach some lessons that are relevant, to examine the plans that those teachers have used, to check their own understanding and to push their own thinking about what it truly means to get systems of equations or to get quadratic functions. And so we're really excited about that partnership and really looking forward to, this is like a fairly new project for us, so we're really looking forward to seeing how that plays out in classrooms in the future. And I think what excites me about it is just that this allows real differentiation so that all of our teachers are getting exactly what they need when they need it, rather than bringing together our 6th grade teachers and our 12th grade teachers in the same session that can sort of meet a lot of their needs, but not completely everything.
Sure. So I'll just pick up on Grace's list in the sense, just adding one more example. Another aspect of content knowledge that I would want to include is the knowledge that teachers have, let's stick with math, related to the Common Core State standards for mathematical practice. And so what kind of content experiences have people had that would allow them to create classrooms in which those practices would be represented? I'll put a quick pitch in for a different MET study, which is the Mathematical Education of Teachers, produced by the Math Association of America, that tackles this question head on and gives responses at elementary, middle, and secondary. But what I really wish is, I really wish there were a 4th person on the panel here, because I suspect there's a lot of commonality here. And what I would be interested in is the inclusion of residency programs that are making really tough decisions that, for example, in a university-based context that we have, where with the kind of accreditation that we must have by law, we don't get to make decisions about, at the secondary level, what kind of content background we would suggest for future teachers. And, you know, residency programs working closely with urban schools, I think, have to make really tough calls, and that would add a dimension to our conversation that we, you know, can't right now.
Just one, I mean, I think bringing up the Common Core is absolutely critical, because I don't think anybody that looks at the Common Core says, teachers need more content knowledge. I mean, we're doing a lot of training around Common Core in NIMSY's other program. In fact, we just spent most of the month with almost all of the higher ed people in Tennessee training their College of Education people on what the Common Core means and going through a very basic understanding of that. And when we worked with them and we had discussions at the end of the day of what does this mean, they always came back with, okay, the coherence, the vertical integration, that all requires a much deeper subject matter knowledge for their teachers. So I think the Common Core is going to really push that as well. However, we always in education seem to stake out opposite ends of the spectrum. So, some people are going, well, it has to be all subject matter knowledge and it has to be all pedagogy, but there has to be that blend. And I think that's what we all seem to agree on, is that you can't just leave pedagogy out. You can be a great, Einstein could be a horrible teacher because he may not know how to convey that knowledge and get students to understand and be able to work with the wide variety of students that we have. But he's a brilliant person. He may be a great teacher, but we don't know that until we really understand, do they know how to convey that information? Do they understand the strategies that are going to work with diverse groups of students so that all those students are going to succeed in their class?
And I'd like to actually just pick up on, and Dan, you used the word experiences, and I think especially when we're talking about the Common Core, I don't know about all of you, but my experience in my high school math classes was pretty traditional. The teacher read something out of a textbook, did some examples on the board. I sat there and wrote a bunch of stuff that I didn't understand, and then did 80 pages of problems that were all the same with the numbers swapped out. And I think that's the experience that many of our math and science teachers have had themselves. And yet I think all of them could tell you that that's not the experience they want for their students. But sometimes they're not sure what that alternative is. And I think the Common Core calls for that alternative. It calls for the project-based learning that Dave, you were mentioning before. It calls for a vision of math instruction, and hopefully, I'm sure the next gen standards are doing this for science, but a vision of instruction that gets students deeply engaged in processing and making meaning of the content, and in diving much, much deeper than just, here are the steps, here are the algorithms, here are the things that you need to memorize. And so for our teachers to be able to execute on that vision, they've got to have the pedagogical and the subject matter knowledge that they need to not just be able to say, here's what I don't want for my students, but here's what I do want, here's why it motivates me, here's why it inspires me, and here are the tools and resources I have to make it possible.
So I think it's sometimes easier to talk about secondary content knowledge, and I want to push back and circle us back to the question of what does an elementary teacher, again, a generalist who has responsibility for an array of courses, how are we going to make sure that they have the knowledge and skills and the pedagogical content knowledge that they need? I would just note that one data point in our vital signs shows that the amount of time elementary school teachers are spending on science has decreased from 1994. We don't want to just say more time if that time isn't well spent. So what can we say about elementary? I know I'm probably skipping you.
You should, yes, because we spend most of our time in the middle and high school. I mean, I will say, we just, going back to Grace's point, the need for continued professional development or teacher training is absolutely critical, and we continue to push on that front. You're going to run out of time in 4 years to do everything you want to do to get teachers prepared. So at some point, you do have to understand that the professional development has to kick in to then keep that learning going and continue to build on that subject matter knowledge.
So maybe I'll chime in at this point. I'd like to build on your earlier comment. So one of the things that we've experienced as we work particularly with practicing teachers who are elementary certified and who are trying to transition to work in the middle grades and strengthen their STEM content background is that there's a tension between sort of something that you metaphorically would call the amount of content knowledge and the nature of the experience, to go back to the theme that you picked up on. Because in part, what we want people to be able to demonstrate is ways of engaging in doing the content, and also a shift in their own identity, not to be a person who says, I'm not a person who does those kinds of things, but rather I'm a person who sees a value and does those kinds of things in my own particular way around the issues that are exciting and of interest to me. I mean, one thing that I think is particularly fascinating around the generalist who teaches in a self-contained classroom is the way in which they might have access to resources that those of us who've taught sort of kids in batches during the day don't have, which is the experience of the same children across a range of subjects and the capacity to therefore work with them in an interdisciplinary way. So to a certain extent, one of the things that we've been trying to work on in the program that we're creating for practicing elementary teachers who want to get certification as elementary STEM teachers is for them to learn how to capitalize on what they know from their interaction across the day with students to then focus on particular goals or issues in STEM teaching. We'll see. I mean, Maryland is, as far as I know, the first state to create certification for elementary STEM teachers, and I think it's going to need, we'll have to see how that plays out. What is it really going to mean for an elementary teacher to be STEM certified? What kinds of activities will they therefore do in their classrooms that other teachers don't do?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think when you think about a generalist, they still need a lot of content knowledge. They still need a lot of pedagogical subject matter knowledge, but given the bandwidth that they have, particularly as pre-service or novice teachers, there's just not a lot of time to learn everything they need to learn. I think that's where the in-service professional development comes in, and that's also where it becomes really important to, I think in many cases, help our elementary teachers understand the incredible amount of research out there about how children best learn mathematics or how children best learn science. And so often that is through hands-on activities, through very concrete representations, through the use of manipulatives, through the use of multiple models for things like multiplication or fractions, which are not always obvious to someone who has never taught elementary school, particularly given that many of us were not taught that way ourselves. And so we're working really hard to develop a program in partnership with our elementary literacy specialist to think about those opportunities for interdisciplinary learning, for those opportunities to integrate math into your daily routines when you're lining up or when you're coming in and talking about the calendar or when you're transitioning between activities, but also then thinking about what it means for us to be very explicit with sharing with teachers, giving them the experience of using those models, using those manipulatives, so they feel comfortable with them, so they feel familiar with them, and are then easily able to translate to their classrooms. So I think there's a lot we need to be sensitive to about how much they're learning and how much they're taking on, but we can really capitalize on the experiences they have with children and also ensure that they're up to speed on what the research tells us is going to work for kids.
So let's turn our attention to acknowledging that we've got some wonderful programs that may not have all the answers, but have a lot of successes that they are already demonstrating. And the question is not just these three programs, but how do we scale up? There is clearly the sentiment, and I'll say this on behalf of the companies that are members of Change the Equation, to stop sort of reinventing the wheel in each new place and instead to think about how we're going to scale up. Is that an economy of time and an economy of effort? So how do we scale up successful programs? And how do we institutionalize the practices of successful programs so that we're certain that they grow roots?
Well, I mean, really, I mean, to be blunt, it all comes down to funding. We could have a U-Teach program everywhere we possibly want if we had the funding to do so. With the Howard Hughes Medical Grant that we just received, it allows us to go into 10 universities. We've had 45 express very high interest in that. So that selection process is going to be such that some are not going to be able to get that grant and start a program there. So the demand is outstripping the supply of funding. So if we had that, we could make some changes. I think part of what the White House is doing right now with trying to consolidate STEM funding is an excellent first step. When you divide the STEM funding amongst 200 some odd different programs under all the departments over in the federal government, that tends to not provide the focus that we need to get that funding out to programs that are really successfully replicating. I think Dan also pointed out, a lot of it comes from the states themselves. Some places cannot have a UTeach program because we only have 18 hours worth of pedagogy classes, so that may not qualify to be a teacher in that particular state. So then we've got to work with that university to then change state certification regulations to ensure that we can then get that done. And that's really easy. It takes about a day and a half. So, that becomes one of those problems. So we've got to make sure that we're not getting in the way of programs that work and can really help get those teachers into the classroom. And then I think we've also kind of talked a little bit or danced around the issue of, teachers need to be seen as that critical element in our society that is helping our economy, that is helping us succeed, or is helping us make sure that we have an equal society. So how do we make sure that we elevate teaching so that it's much easier to recruit teachers and then get them in the classroom and make sure that they stay in the classroom?
Grace?
Yeah, I think we certainly run into similar funding challenges, and as an alternative certification program, I think different states have different regulations, and as a national organization, there's a lot to figure out from state to state. I think one thing that, on a more micro level, I think one thing that we're thinking a lot about is just how to be very creative with the resources that we do have, because one of our challenges is that when we've got a whole bunch of new teachers, like I think we bring in 3,000 STEM teachers each year, so a ton of fresh faces, they need to see really good STEM teaching happening, and it is really tricky for us to find that many veteran mentor teachers who are able to work with our brand new teachers each year. And so what we're actually turning to now this summer, we've hired a group of veteran teachers who have between 10 and 20 years of experience in the classroom, and we are planning to ask them to teach summer school and then film every move they make and film a lot of do teacher interviews with them. Why did you make the choices you did? I saw this in your plan, but then you did this in execution. Like, what was your thought process there? Or what happened with this particular student in one of your classes? Like, why did you respond the way you did? So that we've got all of that on film, and we've got their lesson plans, their curriculum materials, and some of that thinking that they do that's captured. Because I think, so much of teaching is an art and requires on developing judgment that comes with experience. And a brand new teacher, no matter how great their pre-service training is, just simply isn't going to have the judgment of a 20-year veteran. And so we're hoping by capturing all of this on film, collecting their resources, collecting their materials, we've worked really hard to ensure that our cohort this summer is a very diverse group across a number of factors. That we'll be able to use that material in our training and therefore give more of our teachers exposure to more seasoned veterans than otherwise would have been possible if we didn't have this sort of technology to help us out. So I think there are certainly a lot of broader societal issues when it comes to funding, certification, regulations, policy, and all of that. I think there's also more that I think we need to do as teacher preparation programs to think about how we can be creative with the resources that we do have.
Dan?
Maybe one comment that, since I'm a faculty member at a university, might sound a little self-serving, but I think universities are an overlooked resource with respect to this question, because I think universities constitute a network of institutions that could be utilized more effectively, and I think UTeach is an example of an attempt to leverage universities as a network where, because of particularly state-funded institutions sort of being able to collaborate across states, because to some degree there isn't as much direct competition. I know that cuts across all sorts of ideological divides about how we as a society might go forward, but I do think that teacher education in universities has come under a lot of criticism, justifiably so, but I think at the same time, people are overlooking how universities are a particularly interesting resource, and particularly if teaching and learning at university shifts, particularly in the STEM fields, if people really gather together and respond effectively to the PCAST report, there might be a way in which the experiences that people are having in STEM fields at university are a resource for the improvement of K through 12 education in a way that I don't hear being a part of the conversation in terms of policy. Now, how to then build on that insight in terms of particular policies, I don't have specific ideas.
So one of the things that's underlying all this is money. Dave was forthright in saying that, but it's certainly true for the NSF grants that the university may have and other funding sources. And what you often hear from funders, including our corporate funders, is they want to see coordination and they want to see value add. So it's not just 10 different programs, jostling one another, me. So my question is sort of not particularly these three programs, but how can there be more cross-fertilization between teacher preparation programs, and how can lessons learned from one be shared and inculcated into other ideas? Grace, you want to start?
I'll try. I think this is a real challenge, and I think that's something that we have thought a lot about because, Dan, I totally agree with you. I think there's a lot in the traditional education university model that is often not recognized in alternative certification. And I think we have been trying to start that conversation. I'll share a couple of things that we've been doing and also some of the challenges that we're running into. I think a lot of our work on my team in particular is informed by academic research that's coming out of ed schools. And so we're able to learn from people who have been doing this for much longer than we have and drawing on a more broad research base than we're able to draw on. And sometimes that involves inviting faculty members to come in and consult or to lead sessions for us or to do an audit of our professional development and let us know from their perspective what's working and what's not working. We're engaging on a partnership with the University of Washington for this coming year to redesign our pre-service training from scratch, which sounds a little frightening, but I'm also really excited about it because they found a lot of success in using, I think, what we're calling sort of like an execution-based model, where instead of starting with the learning theory and the lesson planning, when teachers don't quite yet have a schema for how that's supposed to work, they start with the action and watching a veteran teacher, mimicking that veteran teacher, analyzing that veteran teacher, and using that to develop the skills that they need to create a successful lesson plan. And in the meantime, they're delivering very strong lesson plans that have been written by experts. And so we're partnering with them to bring that model to our pre-service programming using some of the video models that I mentioned earlier. And we're inviting researchers from a couple other institutions as well. And I'm very excited about this partnership because I think there's a lot that they've learned. And this also allows us to sort of combine our expertise. They've done a ton of work in elementary, a ton of work in some fields where we have not done as much work. And I think we've done a little bit more work in secondary than they have. So I think that'll be a really exciting opportunity. I think one challenge we face in working with them and in working with other organizations is that there's just so much jargon in education, and we all have these acronyms and we all have these terms, and sometimes we mean the same thing and sometimes we don't. And I think it takes a lot of very explicit, dedicated effort to ensure that we're speaking the same language and that we're on the same page with what we're discussing. I think in the math world and also in the science world, I hear the term conceptual understanding being thrown around all the time, and very few people seem to be able to tell me what that is. But if we're going to build a program together around developing students' conceptual understanding or teachers, like, we have to know what we mean by that. And it can be really difficult to step out of our individual silos where we're used to using our own language, our own internal acronyms and ways of talking about things, and really listen to what our partner organizations are bringing and to listen to the language that they're using and the things that matter to them. And not so in the sense that, I guess, to use the math analogy, like, we don't want just 1 + 1 = 2 here, or like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. We want to really truly be able to capitalize on the strengths that each of our organizations bring, and that just takes time. And in a world where so many of us are operating on grants or operating on year-to-year revolving donor funding, time is a luxury that we don't always have, but something I think we need to be really thoughtful about.
Yeah.
Sure. Maybe let me pick up just on the theme again of ways in which universities and as institutions have interesting characteristics. So I think of an organization like the Association of Math Teacher Educators. And I see that as an organization that's really fundamentally about sharing insights in teacher education among a national group of folks who are involved in that work. And I think there are a set of incentives built in the university system to have people going to activities like that and engaged in sharing in those kinds of networks. And I think that that's a place where we could figure out how to make greater and greater use of that kind of resource as a way to get sharing happening among networks of schools. So I'll just leave it at that with that theme.
The, first off, our group is putting the finishing touches on a video on conceptual understanding that will be free and available to everybody on the NIMSY website. So, because we found that same thing on conceptual understanding. Right now, the 35 universities that are part of the UTeach program are meeting in Austin, and they come together every year. All the master teachers that are involved in the program, the professors, the deans, and some students all come down to share what's going on, what's succeeding, what's not succeeding. A big part of what the UTeach Institute does in replicating UTeach with NIMSY is that they also gather the data every year. So they're tracking everything that's going on, and then the response is, okay, obviously something great is going on in Kansas. Can you share with us what you did on this particular area so that we can share that with everybody? So I think there are definite ways to do that, but I echo what Grace says. I probably have 3 phone calls a week easily with people that want to partner with NIMSY, but have no idea what partner means. What does that mean? Somebody told them, you should partner with NIMSY. They're doing STEM, you're doing STEM, you guys should partner. But really figuring that out with very limited resources and very limited time, it really makes that a very difficult thing to understand. How do we complement each other? How do we bring each other in to really work on a partnership that will value students? And how does that actually happen? And that's a very, very difficult thing. People have told us for years that we should partner with Teach for America, but they have a 2-year window. The first year, there's no room. We couldn't even squeeze in an hour of training into that first summer if we wanted to share things. So it's very difficult when you've crafted a program to address the needs of your students or your teachers, and then to figure out how am I going to bring this other element in. So that that is a big challenge. It's easy when you've got a group of universities. It's easy when you've got a group of schools that you're working with to network them together. But to go outside and bring in some other outside element, that's not easy.
I appreciate the candor we just heard. So let's turn now to the audience and see if you have particular questions. There'll be a microphone coming your way, and if you could identify yourself and...
Yes, hello. Steve Bartlett, Einstein Fellow at the National Science Foundation, also a high school physics teacher in Virginia. Let me challenge University of Maryland, since that's my alma mater. I think part of the STEM issue is pipelining. Even in colleges today, the College of Science doesn't always communicate with the College of Education. It seems to me that the silos are necessary to get specific training, but when you talk about STEM, are you talking about rivulets of a stream hitting a lake? Or are you talking about smashing all the silos together into one gigantic grain thing? So the question is, how much interface does the College of Education and the College of Science and the College of Math have to address this STEM issue?
So
Softball.
yeah. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of kinds of activity that are going on. I actually, as a university faculty member, feel that those silos are much less present than they were, let's say, 15 years ago. Because of the focus on improving undergraduate education in STEM, I think there's an increasing connection between colleges of education and faculty in STEM disciplines. There's a lot of interest on the part of STEM faculty in educational matters and a desire to figure out how to work together. So when we got our grant from the Maryland State Department of Ed to work on STEM certification for elementary certified teachers, we put out a call to faculty across the campus. We got folks from engineering, we got folks from the iSchool, we got folks from natural sciences who are really passionately involved in this. Some are also the distinctions about tenure stream faculty versus non-tenure stream faculty when it comes to these issues. You know, as increasingly in universities there are streams of faculty that have greater teaching responsibilities, it'll be interesting to see over time whether internally there are ways to recognize and build on the expertise that those folks have, but at least informally in our university, those folks have a lot of opportunities to collaborate across silos. It's easier for me as a director for the Center for Math Education to have people teach across math and the College of Education if they're in a non-tenure track position than if they're in a tenure track position. And so that opens up kinds of collaborations that 15 years ago weren't as easy. So at least where I sit, those issues, I don't know how to deal with all the mixed metaphors, but you know, there are ways in which we're working together on lots of different initiatives together on a regular basis.
And I go back, I mean, in 2007 when we started replicating, we really had to recruit universities to say, we need your College of Ed and your College of Science to get together and apply for this grant. Now we have universities, and we gave the grant. It's a $2.2 million grant to get a UTeach program started. We were recruiting people to take this money from us in 2007. Now we have people seeking us out. Old Dominion University just announced that they're starting a UTeach program. They went out and raised the money themselves because they want to do this. So I think you're right. I think that the culture in universities is changing. It is transforming. They're seeing the need, and they're making the change necessary to change what you just talked about.
Other questions?
Hi, Cindy Hasselbring, Einstein Fellow, also placed at the National Science Foundation and math teacher from Michigan. And my question is for Grace. It sounds like you have great resources for teachers teaching Common Core, next generation science standards, but there's 3 million other teachers out there. Do you have any plans to open up those resources and share them with others so they can learn from your experienced teachers that you utilize?
That is a great question, and to be honest, I just don't know the answer to that because I think that decision lies a little bit outside my own personal field of expertise. I do know that we have a partnerships team that is working very closely with districts and other organizations to see not only what can we learn from others, but what can we share that we have learned in the past. And I think you'll see a lot of variety around the country. I know in Houston, for example, their superintendent there has worked pretty closely with our organization and with some other organizations to try and bring in some of the lessons that we've learned into the work that they're doing. I think the appetite for that varies a lot. I think we are definitely thinking about it, but I honestly just don't know. Yeah.
We've been working with Park and the educator leader cadre and building out that. So NIMSY has been working with a great group of people to develop resources that is for training teachers, and those are all open as they're released. So they're on our website at nms.org, and they will continue. We have another, it's 6 live meetings or 5 live meetings, 6 virtual convenings, and all of the content created for that is open to any and all teachers.
So just to underscore how the world is changing, a question's come in from Twitter. And that is, how do we address needs of teachers of color who are more likely to leave the profession? Anybody want to grab it?
I mean, I think Grace brought it up right at the beginning. It is about preparation and resources and support. That's at least the 3 elements that we've found. You've got to provide the preparation in UTeach programs, getting them into the classroom, getting into the classroom that they're targeting that they want to work in. So it can't just be in a suburban classroom. If they want to go in an urban classroom, that's where they need to receive the training. And then they've got to have that support. We don't, in our school districts, do a great job on induction and support over those first couple of years. So having a network, I mean, I think that's one of the strengths of, that is one of the areas where I think we can work with TFA, is TFA has these Saturday, I'm taking your thunder, but they have these Saturday sessions where teachers come together and talk about what they're having and supporting each other, getting more training. I mean, I think that's a model that we're going to have some of our UTeach teachers in Dallas go to those sessions next year to really experience that. And really, it's all about bringing and networking those teachers so they can talk about what's working, what's not working, what are you doing, how did that work, and having that sharing that can really then build that support and keep those teachers. You can't just send them in a classroom, leave them in the classroom, and hope for the best and see them at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think this is certainly an area that we're thinking a lot about, and we definitely don't have all the answers. But I think I can share one thing from my personal experience as a teacher of color. I think I actually did not have a single Asian American teacher throughout my entire life. And I took Asian American history courses, I took Asian American psychology courses. None of those were taught by Asian Americans. And so the idea of going into the teaching profession was, I just hadn't seen anybody who looked like me do it and be successful and like it. And I think that's something that we are thinking a lot about at Teach for America. If we want more teachers of color, we need more teachers of color to inspire our students of color to want to go into education and to want to become teachers. And for the teachers we do already have, we need to ensure that we are creating and providing an environment that feels supportive to them, that allows them to be who they are rather than making them feel like they sort of have to assimilate into a culture that's not familiar to them. I think we are doing a lot of work right now. This is very, very new to us, but I think there's a big need in our organization, particularly given the demographics of our core and the demographics of the communities that we work in, to explore, to dive further into culturally responsive teaching. And so we're doing a lot of thinking about what it really means to ensure that all of our teachers have the time and space and the sort of sense of safety to explore their own identity and think about how their personal identity influences the way they build relationships with their students, the way they interact with families, with colleagues, with other people in the building. And then to think about that, I think, particularly from a STEM perspective, I think sometimes people can say like, oh, that culturally responsive teaching stuff, that's for the English teachers to deal with, or like, that's for the history teachers to deal with. And I think particularly in STEM, where there are so few role models and leaders of color, I think it's particularly important for us to ensure that our math and science teachers of color can see themselves as those leaders and those innovators, and are able to understand how the work they do in the classroom every day influences their students, not only academically, not only in terms of their access and opportunities for college or opportunities for particular majors, but also influences their students' cultural competence and their students' sense of awareness and understanding of who they are as individuals. I think the way a teacher is open or not about his or her own identity has a huge effect on how students think about that. And we are also thinking a lot about how teachers can use the tools of mathematics and the tools of science to build students' critical consciousness and their understanding of how so many of the institutions of power in our society are grounded on mathematical models or grounded on scientific data. And for our children and for our teachers to truly feel like they are able to be a part of that and able to be leaders and innovators on that front, I think they need to deeply understand the math and science content, but also how their personal identities affect the work that they're doing with the students that they work with.
If I can pick up on one theme that we haven't discussed much today is how the work of the teacher has been changing in recent time and how it might change in the coming future, and the implications of those changes for the issues that we've been discussing. Thinking about a project that we did where we did case studies of well-respected African-American math teachers, one thing that distinguished that group of teachers was the way in which they felt they could use their own experiences as a resource to craft instruction. And in response to the question, I wonder whether teachers are always in a situation where they feel they can actually have the power to act on the things that they see that need to be done. And when they don't feel that sense of efficacy, I think that's one of the reasons that folks leave the profession.
Hi, I'm Susan Sclafani. 10 years ago, started the National Math Science Initiative at the Department of Education. And in listening to you, I'm very interested in the fact that Maryland is taking elementary school teachers and turning them into middle school teachers. NIMSY has not yet reached back to elementary schools. And so we have the problem of elementary school teachers who lay the foundation for math and science not having access to the kind of redesign, rethinking, reform that is so necessary, particularly for elementary school teachers who have so little in terms of math and science background at the universities in most cases, in teacher education programs. So what are you doing, what are you planning to do in the future to address the kind of coursework that elementary school teachers need to prepare them to lay foundations in elementary school children? And what can we do it to scale up in that direction as well as scaling up the current programs?
So if I think about some of the advances in university-based teacher education in recent times, it seems to me that the mathematical knowledge for teaching and the design of content courses based on research on mathematical knowledge for teaching seem a very strong part of that work. So the work at University of Delaware, the work at the University of Michigan, and that's certainly influenced the nature of the content courses that we offer on our campus. We've also just initiated an area of emphasis for the elementary school teachers in STEM that's meant to be a more interdisciplinary experience, and the courses that we created for the practicing teachers who are going to get this STEM certification, the design of those courses is influencing what will be in that area of emphasis. And then to go back to the earlier question, all of that was influenced by the I-Series courses that were developed at the universities, which were attempts to reach out to undergraduates who weren't in STEM fields by having faculty in STEM fields design intriguing topic-based, content-based coursework. So courses on pollinators in crisis, for example, or a range of other courses. There were a series of these courses developed. We're taking the course development that went into that and figuring out how that kind of coursework gets into the undergraduate elementary teacher preparation program to strengthen the background of those candidates in STEM.
One thing we've learned is that, universities have to want to change in order for you to come in and help them change. So when we went in and did the training in Tennessee with the higher ed folks, it was quickly evident to them what math their teachers would need based upon the Common Core state standards. So they immediately started talking about, and when they really looked at the way the standards work and the way they build on it every year, they took it upon themselves to say, okay, we've got to make sure that this is the math our teachers have. So that's what I think it's going to take. We can't go out and create a program and say, here, you need to do this. But having those deep discussions over a couple of days with the colleges of education was just really transformative to them and even to us to see how quickly they got also the interdisciplinary side of that they could teach some of the math through science and that they could teach close reading through science and social studies and how that was all going to blend together. And they got really excited about what this was going to mean for their teachers and what they had to do to go back this summer and really change what they were doing. So I think we ourselves are not going to be able to change, but we can help facilitate that change once those universities see what's going to really happen with the standards.
I think elementary is something that we're thinking a lot about right now, just because it's something that we historically have not done a ton with. And we're working very closely with Marilyn Burns, with Deb Ball, in the math, on the math side of the elementary work, and they're sort of sort of the voice of reason on our shoulders, helping guide us through our development of new programming as we figure out what our elementary teachers need. And to come back to a theme I've heard all of us speak about today, I think so much of it just goes back to the experience that the teachers have during their teacher prep program, particularly since for a lot of our teachers, it's been quite a while since they were in elementary school, and it's hard to remember what third grade math should be like or what first grade math should be like. And so if we're able to provide them the experience where the sample lessons they're teaching, the model lessons they're seeing, the people they're talking to are using interdisciplinary methods, are using the types of models and manipulatives that research tells us they need to use, we sort of build the schema that they then operate on. And so we want to really make sure that many of their early experiences come from research and are grounded in the experiences of veteran teachers rather than allowing them to sort of start from scratch.
So let me sort of begin to wind this up and ask each of you to peer into your crystal ball and say what you envision your program or STEM teacher preparation to look like in the next 10 years. Reach out there and what do we need to get us there?
Geez, 10 years. I mean, I never would have thought that Common Core state standards would have come 5 years ago, so I really don't know what will happen. I do see us in many, many more universities. The program continues to evolve. I think the piece that we're all going to have to address pretty quickly is the T in STEM and have more computer science teachers, do a lot of what Dan's talking about and taking, how are we going to take these great math teachers that Dan's producing and make sure that they can start delivering computer science in middle school and elementary school. So that's a toolkit that we don't have, that we have to address. If you haven't seen the website with, that we don't, it's most of the STEM jobs, but it's not taught in 90% of the schools. So I see a huge emphasis on computer science and the computer science changes. College Board's coming out with a new AP in 2016, 2017, driven by NSF and the work that they're doing. So I see that as a much larger discussion. I mean, if you look at it, it didn't get brought up till now. Shame on us. We really got to start addressing the T in STEM.
Dan?
I've never been good at crystal balls, but I'm really curious whether in the next 10 years there'll be really large changes in what it means to be a teacher in the United States. So our university is starting a charter school in the fall that's with Connections Academy, and I'll be really curious to see what happens through their experimentation in how the nature of the work of a teacher will change, what kind of work is done online, what's the face-to-face teacher's responsibility vis-a-vis that work. So I don't know whether the next 10 years will really see a big shift in that. In terms of sort of what's going to get us sort of future improvements, there was an earlier theme that came out about improvements in the work life of teachers. I don't know whether the kinds of changes in the work life of teachers will ultimately be for the good. But I think we have to figure out how to make the profession more attractive, not just with incentives in the beginning, but with ways in which the work itself, I mean, you talked about intellectually stimulating pathways for growth, but how can the work itself be satisfying, doable? I'd love to see improvements in that, and I don't know if a shift towards blended instruction in some way will create opportunities to make the work life more feasible, but right now I think the profession doesn't look really tremendously attractive, even to those people who've decided that they're going to take a good chunk of their lives and go into it, and to those people who've already committed themselves and know that they're going to do it, but still don't feel like it feels great.
Last word, Grace?
Gosh, no pressure. I think it's hard for me to do the crystal ball thing, but I can sort of share what I hope to be true in the next 10 years. And I think, Dan, what you said resonates a lot with me. I think I'd really like to see a world in which teaching is a highly sought after and desirable profession because it's fun, it's exciting. You get to work with children all day and sort of see them grow up and see them start to think and learn in different ways that they hadn't before. I can't really think of many more things that are more exciting or rewarding or empowering than that. I think in order for that to happen, I think the role of the teacher needs to change. We need to respect teachers a lot more than we currently do. And I think there are two things in particular that are on my mind about that, and hopefully things that we can do, but hopefully things that will change broadly in society. One is about what it means to be a math teacher or a science teacher in particular. I think given some of our societal attitudes around math and how boring it is, how useful it is, how hard it is, I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see I think many of us in this room, I'm assuming by the fact that you're here today, don't see STEM subjects as boring and useless and instruments of torture that so many of our students often see them as. And I'd like for us to change that perception in society and start thinking about STEM not just as a necessary evil or a hurdle we have to get through, not just as something we have to do in order to be competitive or we're going to fall behind, but something like really exciting and really that allows us to innovate and to be creative in ways that are different from some of what our colleagues in other fields do. So I'd like to see that change. I think that will have a big impact on the way teachers are attracted to being in the STEM, to teaching STEM classes. And the other thing I'd like to really think more about is what the professional development looks like for teachers. Like Dan said, and as Dave mentioned earlier, it's not just about starting teachers off right. We only have very short time with them before they're off into the classroom for hopefully decades. I think right now, professional development is really inconsistent, sort of depending on your school, your district, your principal, or the particular organization that your school or district contracts with. And I think sometimes professional development is not always the most fun thing and not always something that most teachers look forward to. And I think we really need to, and I hope we can change the way we think about professional development so that it's less about handing teachers stuff to execute on or about telling them the 5 things they need to do that they're probably not doing, but really empowering them and building a sense where they're able to reflect on their practice and adjust course and analyze and set their own goals for personal and professional development. I think that's how professionals learn and grow in so many other fields. I'm not sure why it feels so different in education.
Well, with that, I thank you for coming to today's STEM Salon. Please be sure to thank a teacher today, even if it's just in your thoughts. And we really appreciate your coming and hope you found this of interest and intrigue. Thank you.